morning and welcome to another edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss developments in the socio-economic space as it affects the economy. Reeling out from the recent reports that we have on the Nigerian economy, last week the inflation report and of course the gross domestic product report for fourth quarter 2020, we continue our conversations as we look at different critical sectors in the economy. Today we're looking at unlocking growth in the real estate and housing market in Nigeria. My guest is Mr. Ayo Ibaru, Chief Operating Officer at NorthCourt Real Estate Firm. Nice to have you, Mr. Ayo Ibaru.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Well, let's first begin with the fact that last week we saw that inflation is rising again. It rose to 16.47%. That's for January 2021 as captured by National Bureau of Statistics. And then last week again, we got the fourth quarter 2020 GDP reports. And of course, we were optimistic, but a lot of people surprised that we quickly moved out of recession to record a 0.11% growth in fourth quarter 2020 compared to minus 3.62% growth in third quarter, showing that we are, for now, out of the woods. So looking at this, of course, we have the pandemic that we're still grappling with. The growth is a slow growth, 0.11%. And we have rising inflation. I mean, coupled with food inflation, that's over 20%. What are the implications of this to the real estate and housing market?
And a very good question you asked. And the recovery, for the first time in a while, that Nigeria is getting out of a recession in one quarter, growing by 0.11, as you rightly stated. I think it's much needed good news. And I think what's even more important for me, and I think also pertinent to this conversation, is the fact that it was the non-oil sector that did a lot of the heavy lifting. I mean, prior to this interview, we had a short side conversation around the fact that, the oil prices are now picking up. So, maybe interest might leave the non-oil sector and then go back, to the oil sector. But, more to your point, I think it's important to realize that this happened in a pandemic. Now, that's at the end of, all the loss that the economy had to take, and then, of course, the real estate sector. We did put out a report at the end of last year that pretty much broke down Nigeria's possible, three possible outcomes as a result of, the economy and, of course, its implications, for the real estate markets. First of all, we had in the positive scenario, which is what we're seeing now, interestingly, in that there is a recovery in the economy. And I think I will just leave it at that. What this now means is there is now more potential for growth. But just to add, one reason why we believe this growth happened is coming from the real estate sector, and this is confirmed by my conversations with market participants, is that a lot of local funding went into real estate investment. Now, we know that the real estate component tracked, by the MBS reports when they're talking about GDP, usually covers services. And that's really about how real estate products move, from developer to the entire ecosystem, before it gets to the final consumer. So what we found was maybe, of course, the inability to travel, to go abroad, to spend, to holiday, and things of that sort, made sure that there was excess cash in the hands of most people who would usually want to borrow. And so these funds went into the developer. So in a sense, we're not entirely surprised because we are started to see indications of this from June, July last year, when it was clear that, people would not fly out as much as, they usually would have done around that time. So the implications are now that, one, the government has the opportunity to put in more efforts to ensuring that this growth is not lost. Number two, which I believe we will get into going to this interview, is the fact that there are certain things about our legal system, land titling and all of that could be done to ensure that there is further investment. I think I'll just leave that at that so we can speak to the other issues.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite impressed that real estate, like you said, local funds from developers to the ecosystem went into real estate. But it's just nice to hear that real estate was part of the drivers. It's been a long time. We got that feedback alongside agri crop production, mining and quarrying, and other services like telecommunications too. That's always been a key driver. But when we look at the real estate industry, like you talked about the need for improving our legal frameworks. Across all the states, most stakeholders have continued to say that there's need for improving the process for land titling. I know Lagos State has done a lot in that process in terms of trying to make sure that the process for land titling and people not going through those challenges are eased to even deploying technology, amongst others. How are you seeing that in other states of the federation, and even from the federal standpoint? What are those issues that will need to be addressed so that we can really have a better land titling process? And let's key this into data. Part of the analysis around the real estate market is data is really key. Data is key for understanding how the market operates and even being able to assess it over the years. And we know that NorthCourt Real Estate has been doing a lot in terms of analysis, trying to give stakeholders an insight into the market. But just speaking to things like titling and data, how are these issues addressed to really unlock the real estate market?
If you don't mind, I'll take your questions in reverse order. The data in the real estate market is not as much as it should be, but we've moved quite a long way from where we were 5 to 10 years. And we just did a real estate developers roundtable yesterday. And one of the things that we came out with as a highlight was the problem is not really data, even though I get it when people say data is a problem, because you can pay people and they can go out there and get data for you. So maybe it's the accessibility to data that really is the problem. But to leave that, it's really more about the interpretation of the data points and what the data is saying. And a quick example here now is if you had followed the data points on demand for residential real estate up to about June, July last year, the demand was strong for 1-beds and 2-bed apartments in Lagos, especially around central business districts and also in Abuja. Was one of the reasons why the shortlets market has really been on the meteoric rise that it's been on. But what we found, because we were tracking the data and interpreting it in our view correctly, was that towards the end of the year, we started to see an increase in 4-beds and 5-beds demand. Now, for the first time since we've been tracking the movement of demand for real estate asset classes, 2-bed, 3-beds, 4-beds, all of that, 3-beds and 4-beds actually moved faster than 2-beds. It's something that if you didn't see the data, you wouldn't believe it. So I do agree that data is a challenge, and you are right, NorthCourt is doing the best we can. We have free research reports all over our websites. Intermittently, we send them out, and we are doing that, and there are other organizations who are also doing something similar. But we still need to get to that point where it's a national conversation, because it just makes things easier for everyone. And that brings us to the next point, land titling. So land titling is and has always been a very big issue in Nigeria, largely because of how it's structured. So we all know the Land Use Act, the sole power of land control, direction, etc., final approval in the hands of the government of that state. And even the federal government needs to get approval from the state government to do things. And that's really a strong power lever. But what I'm finding out now is that the wider states are using that as a leverage to accelerate growth in their states. So they are breaking down the barriers. I think Edo State did something similar last year. They're bringing on technology. They're reducing the barriers to getting land titled. And they are making the process more transparent. And they are also reducing the fees. And I think it's pretty much a race to the finish line of transparency. And whoever gets there first, I think will attract the most investment. So land titling is still an issue, and I don't think it's something that is strange to anyone now. I think what's happening is the individual states are beginning to look for ways to make the process simpler, make the process seamless, reduce the number of fees and stumbling blocks, and then, of course, support those who are willing to do development. There are quite a number of example, that we can go through internationally. I know in the UK, I know in the US, there are processes whereby if a developer wants to get a large project done, what the state government does is they make the process seamless and even throw in a tax credit, throw in some form of for the government, at least for the developer, so that it just makes the entire thing easy. I believe the states that will accelerate fastest going into the next 10, 15 years will be those who see their housing policy as a tool to attract investment. You see, because you cannot separate your housing growth from how you are able to attract investment to your economy. And that's something that I think needs to happen. And land titling, it's the elephant in the room that for me it's just strange why we're not talking about it. A side comparison here would be the case of MTN and current telcos and Nitel. Look at how much these current telcos are paying in taxes, jobs created. There is no way under the sun Nitel would have been able to do that in its current form at that time, even if they had improved. And it just goes to show that if we are able to make housing markets, land titling seamless, liberalize the entire thing, we will see unprecedented levels of growth.
I think that's a big word to all the states. I know, like you said, several states are really trying to. Edo State, Kaduna State, Lagos has done a lot, and also Ekiti. So definitely, if this taken seriously, like you said, it becomes a growth enabler. Well, let's look at the federal level, the Economic Sustainability Plan, looking at mass housing initiative and the impact it will have on the value chain from development to various other layers in the value chain. The Vice President said, yes, that through this initiative, Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo, Chairman of the ESP, we create jobs. The construction industry gets a lot of activities. We can get local companies for building these houses and even key them into renewable energy prospects across the nation. What's your assessment of this ESP mass housing initiative?
So I think once again, it's another well-meaning attempt by the government to solve a very big problem. But again, I'm not sure it shows an appreciation, for the gravity of the problem. And of course, the potential results that we can get should we get this problem solved. Now, I think it was March where the entire concept was discussed, by His Excellency the President, and I think he then approved it in June of last year. And the figure, I remember correctly, is 300,000 housing units annually. Now we are in February of 21, which means that technically by June, July, August, we should have 300,000 units. Now, I'm not sure we're going to hit that target. And I think it's really because we haven't let go of all the levers that we need to get the private sector in. My argument is this, and it's a point that we hold strongly here. The government is better off stepping back and allowing the private sector run with solving Nigeria's housing problem. That's what I think. That's what we think. That's what data shows. That's what foreign jurisdictions have done. Once the government can get the land titling issue sorted out, and then there are a few other things that they can do, these kind of targets will be achieved. In fact, 300,000 by most estimates is small. I mean, 10 years ago or 12 years ago, a study came out and estimated our housing deficit at 17 million. That can be the figure today. And the amount of income, the amount of jobs, the number of jobs, and the multiplier effect. Also, let me say it this way. I don't know of any country that has gotten out of poverty without a strong housing program. I don't know of any. If you do, please let me know.
So I've taken that strong quote. Whether it's China, India, or Brazil, housing has been central to their policy.
Last year, China had over 50 million vacant units of housing. That is, there's nobody to stay there. 50 million. So let's just leave China. You understand me? I mean, look at Singapore. There's no country you can pick on and say, oh, this country is now doing well, that they didn't have a strong housing program. And globally, this really isn't a big deal. I think we're just the ones who are sadly a tad bit myopic on the issue. And there's just so much that can happen here.
Yeah. I mean, what you said is quite instructive, because even, our generation growing up, we heard of things about like our parents had this federal mortgage bank initiative, getting their houses those times, and they were able to pay off and all that. Again, shows the need for us to really, like you said, engage the private sector, which brings to the issues, the concerns around exorbitant house prices and of course regulations, because when private sector is involved, they develop it very well. And I mean, there's nobody that doesn't like to live in a decent house, whether it's 2-bedroom, whether it's 3-bedroom, whether it's 1-bedroom. But affordability, when you look at the purchasing power parity in Nigeria, look at rising inflation, look at how much people are earning, how can we come to that level? And like you said, China had 15 million vacant houses. Again, we need to even look at the data of vacant houses in Nigeria. Lots of developments in Lagos, Abuja, but of course, occupancy, again, an issue. So how can we balance this? Because private sector can do a lot in developing the housing markets, but balancing the prices with regulation, because people have really raised concerns. I mean, there are areas that are like Ikoyi, the house prices are quite high. And then a lot of people now move to places like Ikorodu, which is developing. And then people know, okay, I can afford houses there.
So there's a book that we all read at NorthCourt, and we give it out as a gift. If you ever see, I would send you a copy. It's called Affordable, as CEO wrote. And it's a very simple book, easy to read. And one of the central points to the book is that there are 5 sides. There are 5 things we have to sort out to ensure that the problem of housing and pricing of housing, is solved, of course. So you have 5 people that have to, quote unquote, behave themselves. You have government, you have the individual, you have the community, you have the professionals, and I forget who the last person is. Once I do, I will let you know. Now, you see, the pricing of housing in Nigeria, and especially in Lagos State, is really a function of the pricing of land. And pricing of land is so high, there are a number of issues, but part of it is the cost of perfection and the government's involvement and the fees and all whatnot. And then when you do get into developments, we confirmed as many as 26 agencies at different times in the career of the building will come to take some fee or the other. It was only last week when, there was something happening in Banana Island, 306 closed, and they had all their papers.
Yeah.
And the government shows up and brings the building down. So all those things, all those costs, all those side fees, and then, of course, the major cost of land, contributes to the final pricing. Then, of course, we have to also include the real demand and supply parameters. You cannot say you want to stay in Ikoyi with its infrastructure, with its security, with the ambience, with the waste management and electricity, and expect to pay, what you would pay if you were staying somewhere far-flung, somewhere deep in the mainland. Now, if you listen to what I have said, which I'm sure you did, it's really a function of the quality of infrastructure, and that's where the federal government that you have mentioned comes in. You see, where we have strong infrastructure opening up certain areas of the state and of the country, it is easier to develop housing. But then, there are 5 people, like I said, who technically have to be of a certain mindset before this problem can be solved.
Government, also the individual, community, and the professionals.
The individual also has a very strong part to play. We once did a survey about 4 years ago, and we wrote questions in standard questionnaire, sampling, all of that. And we got students and young professionals who are just been working for 2-3 years to let us know where they would want to live. And I kid you not, 95% of them, 90% of them picked Ikoyi. And I'm like, in what world does that even make any sense? So people's aspirations.
Infrastructure is there. Everything looks good.
That is why.
Gated community,
people's infrastructures, people's aspirations, have to, in a way, rebalance, has to, come to terms with. Now, what we're also finding now is, you just dropped a very strong point, gated communities. That's also another way that the government can attract investments. When, yes, they've put infrastructure in a place, but then they also invest in security or make it easier for the private investors in that same sector to do what you can't do. There's no shame in if, as a government, you can't do certain things. The way the world has evolved now, there are so many things that the government can single-handedly do. In fact, if you go to the advanced countries now, maybe it's just healthcare that the government really can say we stand by. And of course, national security. But then if you go deeper, you find out that there are so many contractors. In security, you're looking at Lockheed Martin, you're looking at various military, industrial complex contractors. If you're looking at healthcare, it's the NHS in the UK. So outside that, you really have a lot of private investment, because that's one of the rewards you get as a government when you put investment in people, in infrastructure. You now have people who have the basic issues dealt with, and then they can come out and make things easier for everyone, and then make a profit in the process. So the pricing of houses in certain parts will still be where they are, although we saw something of a reset last year in Ikoyi, VI, and Lekki phase one, largely because rent and the pandemic and the amount of demand and supply, all the analysis behind that. It just brought out the fact that, at the end of the day, and we saw the trend in transactions that were closed, something that would have gone for between 9 and 14 million, 3-bedroom apartments in Ikoyi went down by about 22%, for rent. So per annum, and that's part of what we're seeing. So places that have strong infrastructure, places that have good security, they will always charge higher. But because of the additional issues of how expensive land is, and all the government fees and things that have to go with that, perfection and all of that, that further adds an unnecessary, layer of fat to final pricing that the final consumer has to deal with.
I think the part you mentioned about the quality of infrastructure is very important. I talked with an expert also in the real estate last year, and he said the UN Habitat, one of the directors, when she visited Nigeria, really, again, decried the fact that Nigeria is among top 3 homes to the highest amount of slums. It's not really a good narrative, for a country with a huge potential. I know our population is over 200 million or around that. And again, the data, like you rightly said, we need to even come to clarity on the housing deficits. We've had 17 million, 18 million, and all that.
It can't be 17 million. It can't be
17 million, definitely. But when you look at our national housing plan, how do you think, working with states, we can really address this high amounts of slums, these areas that have issues with infrastructure? So not everybody needs to live in Ikoyi, but people can live in different parts of the country with enabling infrastructure. Like we see rails are beginning to come up now. So like in the UK, some people live in Glasgow can connect to London by rail and get back to their house. So maybe in the future, with this rail works very well, someone can even stay in Uyo, connect to Lagos by rail. But infrastructure is very important. How can we key this, particularly addressing the issue of the slums, because that's a huge concern. That is showing again the challenge of a poverty that you said housing can address.
Okay, so let me try and unpack your questions. Now, we did a, let's just say, back of the envelope calculation, and it occurred to us that 30 to 40% of young to middle-aged professionals in Lagos will live outside Lagos if there was a transport system that could get them in and out in 1 hour. So, this is a clear opportunity for neighboring states and federal or national infrastructure. You see, because we have to tell ourselves the truth, Lagos is really where the energy is in this country. And yeah, is to maximize the strength and that pumping, heart pumping function that Lagos does. There is no shame in saying Lagos State is the one who will have to, put in the pressure, and every other state will go after that. Each state has its own strength, but when you are going to talk about housing, you're going to talk about the need to deal with how infrastructure can spread growth to other parts of the state. I think Lagos is a good place. Of course, you can pick Kano, Kaduna. Of course, you can go to the east and pick 3, 4, 5 states, there. But in terms of intensity, in terms of aggression, you want to start with Lagos. So that's just to speak to that aspect of infrastructure and the fact that you can use infrastructure to spread growth from Lagos to other states. But, I mean, that's something for the Lagos government to think about, which I believe they are looking into. Slums. You see, so the United Nations, group on habitat, they have always championed cause for slums. I remembered the Otodo Gbame issue that happened a few years ago. And when we went to look into it, the United Nations articles on how you deal with slums actually prescribes that, the government at that time should have provided them a place to relocate, even though they were squatters, even though they didn't have legal title, they should have been provided a place to relocate to safely before they were moved out the way they were moved out. But then that's another issue that has come and has gone, and here we are today. I said all of this to make just one point. You see, when you say affordable housing, when you say infrastructure, when you say mortgages, you can call in the government and say they can work hand in hand with the private sector. When you say slums, that's really the government's baby. Now, that is essentially why you are there, right? Look, if you call the private sector, they might want to come in, they might not want to come in. And it's not even because it's the question of profitability. I think it's a question of really understanding the value of human life. And I think it's something that as a country we need to revisit. So when you look at slums, you look at the lowest of the low, the down and out, people who have no place to go, no place to stay. And this is exactly the reason governments were created in the first place. Yes, you can talk about protecting territorial integrity. Yes, you can talk about ensuring that people are healthy and economies are strong. But these are people who, in a way, combine all the problems that you told us that you've been to solve. So slums are the exclusive reserve as far as they can handle it of the government. Now, of course, they can bring in private sector, but I'm very sure you get what I'm saying. That said, there is a plan and there is a program to create social housing that governments can learn from that have been used in other states, in other countries, especially in Asia. I think sometimes the comparisons that we make with the US and with the UK are good, but there are some comparisons that you go with other countries. Some things you look for in Brazil, some things you look for in Chile, like their housing programs there, and then some things you go to the east. You look at Indonesia, you look at Myanmar, and learn one or two things there. So the case for the development of slums, of course, there are some areas, lest I forget, that can be redeveloped such that they provide uses that are more, I won't say acceptable, are of more value to those who stay in the slums. What I'm finding, a few slum development projects that we have come across is it's almost as if a private developer cuts a deal with the government, they go there, and then they go and develop something that will make them the most money within 18 months. Yeah. And we've seen that, and I don't think it's in the spirit of the UN Habitat's instructions and guidance on developing slums. So to cut that point short and just try and summarize, slums are a very central indicator of how a government is performing. If you want to know how good a government is, go to how they treat their children, their weak and their infirm. That is an eternal statement that we have known for a while. So I believe that the government needs to go and look at social housing projects that have succeeded in other parts of the world. world, and then of course develop a template along those lines. It's something that we've done and we can do, for a few of our clients. But I think I'll just leave it at that.
I like this component of social housing. We would like to get further insight into it. I mean, it's very good. The first governor of Lagos State, late Lateef Jakonde, one of his legacies was the housing infrastructures that he provided over time. I know you may be conversant with those, but definitely, like you said, government has a key role to play in all those areas. I mean, citizens need support at that level. Housing remains very important. But let's look at the growth outlook for real estate in 2021. We're just beginning, at least with the fact that real estate were among the drivers of our growth in honest sector, which grew at 1.67% overall. That's the honest sector. So what must really happen to continue to deepen this growth and really make real estate and housing drive economic development in Nigeria 2021?
So one of the reasons that we believed strongly that the economy would stabilize, but more importantly that the real estate market would grow, was because we have started to notice local investments on a larger scale than we have seen in times past. So ordinarily, when there were people who wanted to invest in the real estate market, 8 out of 10 would take the money.
Yeah.
So you would see, luxurious development that they would buy in these other countries. And then, of course, developers, local developers were not really keen on investing significantly in Nigeria's real estate market. They would, but it was heavily guarded and well thought through. What we're finding out now is it's almost a competition of sorts now. One of our clients started a project last year and is on the second one, and we're already in discussions to start the third one. And so we find out that there's a lot of local investment, developers, service providers. And then earlier on in this year, we now saw another turn of events, which is a few internationals are bringing money back to invest in Nigeria's real estate market. So, it's usually, this is a bit the reverse of what the standard is, and so we find that that's also going on. But I think to make this a bit clearer, I will just try and speak on the various sub-markets in the real estate market. I'll go as quickly as I can, so that we can round up and not take too much of your time. So we know the office grade A market has been struggling because work from home is growing. So we see at best a stabilization or a slight decline in demand for grade A office space. For residential real estate, we see a growth, 4 beds and 5 beds. We think will continue to tick upwards at least until Q2 or Q3 this year. Of course, 1 beds and 2 beds will continue to grow. We also are convinced that the short-let market, which is a subset of the hospitality group or market, will continue to grow. Now, the big chain hotels, they've made significant adjustments to their operational models, so they've recovered from the loss that they went through for most parts of 2020. So we expect them to be back on their feet by Q3 this year at the latest. Retail grade A is coming up in fits and starts, but they're not there yet. It's still very difficult getting back to pre-pandemic levels. We also see the establishment of mixed-use developments as the way to go, at least for the next 2 years or 3, which is where developers put housing, healthcare, retail, and hospitality in one building, and then they put services to run the entire complex. And of course, that protects the investment against whatever shocks the economy might bring. Of course, I wouldn't fail to mention healthcare. I think as of now,
that's the big one.
As of now, I'm aware of 6 healthcare projects that are ongoing, and they are planning to be done by the end of the year. And they're in different sizes. Some are small, some are medium, and 1 or 2 are large. We know Evercare in Lekki, Lagos, just here around where I work. I've been on it for a while, and they pretty much rounded up their project, which is another point at what we spoke earlier about the fact that there are internationals who have looked at the market and said, look, how can we partner with locals and bring the money in to meet a demand? So I think it's really about doing the research and the planning to find where the demand is and putting in the money there. Because, you know, we spoke with almost 20 developers yesterday at the event, and every one of them had to confess to us, because it was a closed setting, that they all made money last year. None of them made a loss last year. They all made money. And these are small, medium, and large scale developers, because really the local money didn't go anywhere. It went into local investment. Then, of course, I would have to mention grade A industrial, grade B industrial, and then, of course, its sister unit sector, logistics. Because of the stay-at-home order, the lockdown of the first quarter and part of the second quarter, people got used to ordering from their homes, and it was a really big deal in Abuja. I think even till now, you know, it's really hard to say you want to get out and go and buy something. Most people just stay at home and order whatever they want. So we expect healthcare and industrial and logistics to grow. We expect retail to still struggle a bit, although I hear their numbers for January and February year on year are better as a group, you know, than one would have expected. Residential will continue to grow. I think big chain hospitality, hotels and service providers will have to restructure the way they do their business, or else they will continue to see record levels of vacancies. What's this thing? The short-let markets. I mean, the way the market has grown, I think, is almost the fastest growth we have seen of any sector in a while. You know, of course, we have land. Land has always been the resilient champion. It's not growing as fast as residential housing, which is strange. But land in Nigeria during recessions, during hard times, never loses money. It never does. So land is still resilient, and I think that's really how we see the market evolving. That's what we see as the outlook for the real estate market in Nigeria.
The one that they say you should invest in land if you have the money, because it's a good asset. But what really interests me, Mr. Ayo Ibaru, is the fact that amidst all the complaints of pandemic and challenges in Nigeria, people are still making demands for four five-bedroom houses. So, this is really interesting. I mean,
let me tell you how the conversations go. So a developer says he's developing this, he's done the research, he can prove that he can rent out what he's developing in 6 months or less. Yeah. And they all have a list of clients, and they go to the clients, and these clients never buy one. They buy 2, they buy 4, they buy 5. So, my dear sir, Nigeria's market is a very dynamic market, and that's why we have chosen to focus on research and advisory, because it just helps us see what's going on and then advise our clients. So yeah, that's what we see.
Those clearly defines that Nigeria means everything. There are opportunities. Nigeria is a miracle market, miracle economy, and the real estate sector is a lot to look out for. And so, yeah, a lot to invest in and identify. Thank you very much, Mr. Ayo Ibaru, Chief Operating Officer, NorthCourt Real Estate Firm, for this interesting conversation, which I now paraphrase, how housing can be a tool of development, economic development for Nigeria. We were looking initially at the opportunities for unlocking growth in the real estate markets, but now we've seen it as a tool for economic development, and hopefully subsequently we'll have you again to talk about what has been happening, and hope it will be positive. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And that'll be all for the Economy and Politics show for today. You can join our website, www.socio-economic.com, and when you get to our website, go to the right hand of the bar, click on property. You'll see the developments around the market, real estate, including some of the reports that we publish from NorthCourt Real Estate and other key players in the real estate market. They're there for you to take cognizance of what's happening in the Nigerian real estate and housing market. Also, if you have any comments to make, you've found some very interesting insights shared today around the real estate and the housing market as a tool for economic development in Nigeria, send your views and comments to news@prochange.com. We're glad to receive them and respond to you appropriately. Thank you once again for being part of the show. To come away again, please stay safe as we continue to navigate this interesting time. Have a nice day.